Do we do some of the bad now?
Sure.
Because here's the problem. Since T1 lost, like, spoiler, we can't even just leave that there's a sentence. There's been about fucking 10 episodes of the Monty Wolf Show that are just all about when T1 wins and how they might be the greatest team of all time. So already they've lost. That's a big problem already, Monty. But then the other problem I have is this. The way they lost, mate, actually is quite bad for a few individual people, including Faker. Like, I've got to say this, mate. If you actually look, Faker's now had these 4 finals in a row where he's come second, right? And he's part of the reason why. Like, here's the thing. I don't think he's choked them away, but I do think in the finals, he just doesn't have the magic that he will in like a random season game or in an earlier quarter. In the big finals, it's something, he wasn't quite Faker for me in a lot of these finals. You know what I mean? Like, I keep waiting for a game where he's going to pick it up. And it's like, it's just a bit, here's the saddest thing about T1 to me, Monty. They haven't played bad in these finals, but they have sort of just like let the opponent take the final from them, if you know what I mean.
Yep. No, I agree. I think the issue is this, Thorin. They've made 5 straight finals in the last 2 years, including all the domestic finals, 2 of the international finals. They have been favorites in 4 out of those 5 finals. In 4 out of those 5 finals, except for the domestic final last year against Gen.G, which they came in as very big underdogs and did get 3-0. That was the expected result of that final. That happened. They really haven't delivered. And I think what's disappointing, and you know, if you guys want a conversation about this too, it happened on Power Spike between me, Dom, and Degon. What's disappointing is the manner in which they lose. There, as you're pointing out, there isn't an overperformance. And to tie this back into Faker's history and his legacy, he used to be the guy in finals who would pull out new champions. He would create extraordinary plays. I mean, think about his mid-Riven play when he played against KT.
Yeah, season 5 summer.
Yeah.
The one where in the same series he did the Cassiopeia, like looked away from the ult and then like fucking like, it was that whole final was cracked. He was playing against Nagne, for you guys who don't know, and he pulled out this mid-Riven, which is obviously not a champion that we expect to see. And he was playing into Cassiopeia, and he tower dives Nagne and has this insane juke where he dodges the ultimate and then ends up killing him on a tower dive in mid lane in a 1v1. And this, you know, there was at one time a Faker who would take these risks, who would play unorthodox styles in championship games and pull them off with such skill that it was truly a wonder to behold. And now the Faker we get is, I guess, unfortunately, the one where in game 4 of this series. Now, I want to add some caveats here because I do think that T1 got really hard outdrafted in this game. It was very, very, very difficult for T1 to play their team composition into Gen.G's team comp, which we will get to. But at the same time, Faker was mechanically misplaying the Ahri. He was dashing in, you know, using Zhonya's before he could activate Charm or Everfrost, getting caught out. Part of that was Peanut being very, I mean, good is a difficult word to use for Maokai Ultimate, but choosing the right time to use the Maokai Ultimate to kind of stuff T1's engage. But as for Faker, it was underwhelming performance. And we really haven't seen the spectacular Faker, and we saw spectacular Faker a lot during the regular season. We did for sure. Like if someone only watched this final, you're going to think that this is like the narrative that like Faker isn't a character. In the split, he was doing very well. I agree.
It was great. This was probably Faker's best split, for no joke.
For like 7 years or something.
7 years.
Pretty good amount.
I mean, he really did hit a new level. So I don't want to take that away from the narrative. I think Faker really played well. But in this final, he didn't carry as hard as he could have or would have in the past. And I think we've seen this too in the MSI finals last year. He was probably, especially in the 5th game of that series, he was pretty bad. In the World's playoff run, his rise in the semifinals was great. He was probably the best player on his team in the semifinals, but he didn't really show up for those finals either. And I don't think it's a nerves issue, but I just don't see like the same commitment to making the big plays and kind of unveiling something new. And in fact, as Dom and I discussed, it really feels as though T1 in the last couple of years, when push comes to shove, they are really unwilling to activate their star players or put them on playmaking champions. Like, we can talk about like the Jin Yumi fiasco, which was just terrible from them, that happened last year in the finals. And then we can also talk about how in game number 4, they just horribly mess up their draft. They save a top lane counter pick for Zeus, and then they basically pick a full peel composition into a Gen.G team comp with Tristana, Jinx, Lulu, Maokai, and Cassante that wants to fight front to back. So they have no threat on the backline carries of Gen.G. Like, you are never going to kill the Tristana and the Jinx. And Tristana and Jinx can both build Kraken Slayer and then just focus down the Scion at the front line. And like, how are you supposed to kill one of these carries? If you go in as Lee Sin or Ahri, you are going to get Maokai ulted. You're going to get Maokai W'd. You're going to get knocked back by Tristana. There's wild growth and polymorph for Lulu. They have so many ways to keep you. Even if you find the best angle ever, they have point and click abilities that just ruin your ability to engage. So, like, the Scion definitely wasn't it in the top lane there. And picking, what's frustrating is you have Keria, who's a player that is the MVP of the league. Now, why is he the MVP of the league? Because he was playing all of these dominant bot lane champions. He reinvented the support meta around the world with the AD carries, but he could also play the enchanters. He could also play engage. And when push comes to shove, you're putting him on Braum in a do or die game. Like, that's the best thing that you guys can do in this series. It beggars belief in a way. And I feel like when it's match point and T1 needs to win a game, they just go so conservative for whatever reason. And they don't really have the killer mentality that you need in order to face tough opponents in these finals.
Which, by the way, not only with past T1s do I think is that the opposite of what it would be, but actually historically, the dominant champions in history do the exact opposite of what you're talking about, Monte. Like, if people don't know, I always used to think in CSGO, the most genius thing Astralis used to do was their rep was that they were the best team just in traditional standard Counter-Strike, Monte, like do proper tactics, read the game correctly, do the correct like handshake at the right time. But what actually made them super dangerous and win loads of championships was when they had you in the position where it's like a 5th round. So in this scenario, it's like late in a game and it's so tense and everyone's afraid to make a mistake. That's when they would do something mega ballsy, Monte, because what they knew was this logic, right? Which is like, everyone's going to be uncomfortable. It's the end of the game. Everyone knows it's like all the stakes are high. So actually, since I know my opponent will also be somewhat tentative to do something, actually any sort of surprise play I make or aggressive move almost becomes amplified in its effect because he doesn't want to do that. He wants to just play safe and sort of just, let's both have a good game and see who wins. So T1, I agree. If you just look at all these finals, it's like I say, that's why I phrased it like that. It's not like they've played bad and they didn't deserve to win any of the finals, but they just sort of like, what they sort of do, Monty, is they just allow the opponent, like, look, if you can like really go to another level, then I'll tip my hat and you win. And it's like, that's bullshit. You don't play like that. You play like a war. You play to win and lose. Because a couple of other angles I have, like, one, the way they drafted in this series suggests I think T1 agree with me on this, which is, mate, if Zeus is the best top laner in the world, could be true. It's every day except every fucking final, mate. I'm sick of that narrative. Like, homie, you've never fucking been the best top laner in any final ever. What's this guy doing? Like, I'm so bored of seeing him turn up to finals. And remember, I'll just put this in context. He ain't playing Smeb and the shot. Bro, he's playing against fucking Thorin. He's playing against Kingan. Like, he's playing against Bin, who at the time in that tournament was shit before that final. In fact, they booted him out of the team after that, if people don't know. Like, these are ones where not only if you're the best do you win, but like, you're supposed to be the big favourite here. Like, the joke is the other team should have to be questioning, how do we deal with Zeus? Like, he's got a fucking monster the game. They don't have to now. Like, he takes care of himself. And then I'll just throw this out there. Even though I don't think like Gumushi's terrible or whatever, I've always thought he was a bit overrated. Mate, the guy who just mad outperformed you is a rookie, bro. He's a fucking rookie. Gumayushi made that Pace guy look like he's fucking ruler. For reals. Like, what are you doing? So those two, like, look, in general, it was a bad performance overall from T1. They didn't hit peak form, but like, that Zeus one, mate, that is going to haunt him, because if you're a T1 player now, if you reach a final, this guy has to have a big turnaround final at some point, because quite frankly, he's the choker, in my opinion. The others, I can give him reason. He's the choker, in my opinion, Zeus.
I think that Zeus's performance over the playoffs has been rocky as well. Now, part of this was that, at least in the KT series, they were blinding him Gnar versus every game, which put him into some bad matchups versus Jax. And Keen is obviously, like, he's the best Jax in the LCK right now. So there's a lot of questions about why you would do that. So they switched it up and started to prioritize his picks during the previous Gen.G series, which was successful. But they didn't prioritize the Jace in this series. Like, Jace was picked in the first game, but then more or less went by the wayside. And they also, it feels like what happens within T1 is that Zeus, here's what I imagine occurs. Zeus must be saying in some of these finals, no, don't worry about the other top laner. I can handle it. I can handle it. I can handle it. Okay. Because there's no other explanation for giving Bin the Gwen.
Yep.
Not banning the Gragas after Doran fucking had an insane, like, I get that you don't expect Doran to have like a crazy pop-off game on Gragas in game number 1. I get that. That's forgivable. Not banning it in game number 2 when you are on blue side is fucking crazy. Like, I'm sorry, guys. That is crazy. But he said what must have happened is it's like, oh, don't worry about the Gragas. It was a bit of a surprise before. I'll play Kennen this game. It's going to be okay. We'll deal with the Gragas. Now, we can also say, what happened in the World Finals? Why didn't they ban Kingan's Aatrox in Game 5 of that series? So something must be happening where Zeus is like, guys, I got this, I got this, I got this. He don't got this, is what we've understood. And then after Game 2, when Gen.G's up 2-0, it's like, well, I guess you're just Scion now. You clearly are not having a good series. We need you on some sort of tank. We're going to play a more traditional front-to-back team fighting composition. And it worked. And I think he did have a good Scion game in game number 3. But the problem is that because T1 keeps getting inconsistent performances out of their stars in big matches, which is honestly kind of inconceivable because Zeus was so consistent in this regular season. He was playing all these blind Gnar matchups, and he was dumbstering people. He was shitting on them. But he just can't deliver on that in the finals. And I think one of the other issues that I've noticed is that T1 in these playoffs didn't feel like they prepared for their opponents. When they played against KT wasn't showing new things. KT was showing the same things that they had shown during the regular split. Now, KT has a lot of dimensions to them, so it can be difficult to beat. But if you compare the T1 versus KT series to the Gen.G versus KT series, Gen.G was extraordinarily well prepared for KT. They beat all of KT's best comps and best champions by being smart and changing their playstyle in their own draft. And then in under 24 hours, Gen.G turned around and they beat T1 playing very different drafts and playing a top lane Gragas that, we didn't see in the KT series, right? They brought new surprises. I guess we did see it in the 4th game of the KT series, but it was like I said, a 24-hour turnaround. They like to play this into Jax. I mean, Gragas is a good matchup into Jax, but these were picks that they debuted on that week, and that maybe T1 wasn't ready for. And T1 didn't bring out any tricks, really. They played a bunch of stuff that they've been used to in the regular season. Like, yes, they have an undefeated up until that point in time Caitlyn Lux bot lane, but the meta's kind of moved away from Caitlyn Lux as teams got better about punishing it and ganking into the bot side on the push-up. And indeed, Gen.G had a level 1 strategy to blow Caitlyn's flash and catch them out when they were trying to kind of aggressively ward forward so that they could push early. We could argue about, I don't think it was worth it, the trade that Gen.G made, because they traded 3 flashes for Caitlyn, including both of their bot laners, even though Nautilus had Hex flash. But had Peanut been able to get down there early, maybe it would have mattered. But perhaps they didn't trade it as well as they could. But you could tell, the point is you could tell Gen.G had a plan. They had a plan for Caitlyn Lux. They certainly had plans for KT. And when you just don't see anything new from T1, I think the reads become very easy. And then combined with that, T1 just seems to play so cowardly in some of these critical games in the draft. And it's not in a way that enables their star players.
Oh, by the way, just as an aside, because I love when people do bad historical fucking takes. Everyone, when I talked about Zeus and how he choked in finals, who's going like, you mean like Khan? Mate, put some fucking respect on Khan's name. You are aware Khan won 6 fucking LCK championships. Like, can everyone just pause for a second and take in what I just said? 6 of them motherfuckers. And by the way, this guy was a very good domestic player. Like, people forget, mate. He was a choker internationally. Yeah. By the way, Zeus is as well. But if Khan was in a world final or an like, yeah, he blew those. That guy was a monster domestically. Don't act like everyone's a choker in every game. Fuck that noise. And then secondly, because I always say the problem with the Khan one is because too many people were like late to the party. They just jumped in at the end of his career like, yeah, he's just a meme who's complete shit. It's like, that was like 4 years ago. That was the narrative. Then on the Gen.G side, just mad props to loads of people on Gen.G. Like if you're Chovy, mate, what did he do wrong? Wasn't this an almost flawless final? Like, just a great performance, wasn't it? Like, remember, this is another guy who was supposed to be a choker. He's now put 2 of them back to back on the fucking board, hasn't he? And this one is with a different set of players. Like, you know what? If he'd have won like he did in summer, but with Ruler, you go, well, you know what? Like, you do have Ruler as well. He might be the best player in the world. Dude, he didn't even have Ruler. Like, the Pays guy's very good, but like, essentially, Chovy won. Unless Pays goes on to be one of the great ADCs of all time, who the fuck did Chovy win with? Pino at the end of his career delights no one, by the way, and Thorin gets memed on every fucking show that everyone does. Everyone just assumes he'll be the weak spot against every great top laner, Keen, fucking Zeus. So, like, mad props to Chovy for just playing a great final, having none of his past problems. Peanut as well. People love to tell me every fucking month, Monte, what Peanut isn't and what he can't do. And it's like, have you got an eye test? Look what he is doing, you morons. He's playing fucking really good jungle in League of Legends. Yes, he doesn't play a certain chat. He doesn't need to. Look at his style, it just works. And also another guy where like, yeah, he can have problems in players, but he's fucking amazing player though. Like, look at his floor level. And then I'll just throw this out there. Everyone knows the Pays guy went off. The other person, just he wasn't in the game that needs to be given praise, is fucking Score. He's won 2 championships in a row, by the way. In an era,
3 finals since starting as a coach. He's made all 3 finals since his first split coaching, and he's won 2 in a row now.
And remember, his team isn't the best team. Like, we just talked on like 2 episodes ago about how T1's won like 80% of their fucking games over the last 2 years. 90%. And within that time period, Score just rocked up, won a title with Peanut and Chovy, supposed to be chokers, I've been told, and Ruler never won an LCK title. Then he makes a new team with fucking rookie Botland, wins that as well. Like, what a fucking amazing job. And by the way, the two styles those 2 Gen.G teams have played show this guy's a cracked coach because he tailors the style to the personnel, but then creates a unique style that no one else can replicate. It's actually really impressive. Yeah, so just mad props to all those Gen.G people. Great performance.
Score, I mean, I'm obviously insanely biased because Score is my favorite player in League of Legends history. But frankly, the story with Score was always like, when is he going to win a domestic title as a player? Because he didn't have the right pieces around him a lot of the time. Finally did it. Is probably the best player in history to never win Worlds. He had an extraordinary career where he role swapped. And he goes to the military, comes back out, turns into a coach, and he has activated this team in crazy good ways.
He obviously just has one of the best minds ever for League at this point. It's just obvious.
I mean, that was what was so amazing about him as a player and made sense for his jungle transition, was that his sense of macro is just insane. And so what he's been able to do with this roster, even with, I would say, you know, sometimes a jungler that is prone to mistakes with a rookie player like Pays, who has to integrate into this roster. We have seen Pays' development over the course. He started impressive. To be fair to Pays, he was very good right from the start, but he did make a lot of rookie mistakes. But we really didn't see that up, very much in the playoffs, and certainly not in the finals. But I think what's impressive about Gen.G is their adaptability. You give them enough time, and maybe double elimination is just the perfect format for Gen.G because they adapt better than other teams. Certainly they were powered up. Obviously they would have been eliminated. Doran had a pretty poor performance in their first best of 5 against T1. And what they were doing in the first best of 5 was that each team was first picking Jace on blue side, and then we were seeing the blind LeBlanc picks from Chovy. And that proved problematic because by the end of the series, T1 had really adapted to playing more peel supports, trying to play Thresh, trying to play Tom Kench, even though Chovy, I think, had individually a very good performance, it was difficult for Gen.G to play out those compositions. You fast forward to the next week, they're playing against KT. And the prep was very, very clearly there. We don't see the LeBlanc anymore. There's more of a priority on the Ahri picks. Now, Ahri was, banned a lot in the first series by T1 or picked away. But you see that priority come out. But what was so impressive to me, Thorin, is that they started playing the Tom Catch. So let's take game 2 between Gen.G and KT. KT wins the first game. Really dominant game from KT. You start thinking, oh shit, Gen.G might be in trouble. So KT pulls out one of their pick compositions. Again, we've talked about this. BDD's up until this point undefeated TF this year. They play Xayah Rakan, Viego Malphite. What is the key of KT's pick compositions? Every champion has some form of single target CC, which allows them to find you on the map and then chain the CC. It also allows them, if you are slightly out of position in team fights, like we saw in the KT versus T1 series, they will just catch your frontliner and then 100-0 them by chaining the CC. So what does Gen.G do in this game? Well, they play champions with a lot of escapes. So they play, an Ornn who's very hard to kill, who also has dashes and can use his ult as a counter engage. They play Wukong, who can W away. They play Ahri, who can ult away. And they have an Aphelios, but critically, they pair it with the Tom Kench. But that's not, that is kind of self-explanatory. But if you actually watch this game and watch how they're playing, Gen.G knows exactly how KT wants to play. And they don't give them any openings. Delight and Paze are glued together on the map this entire game. So there's never an opening to kill the Aphelios because the Tom Kench is always, and I mean always, next to the Aphelios. When they are doing objectives, so for example, when they're pushing mid lane, they basically just death ball. They go as 5, push up the mid lane, Dragon will spawn, and then they will go back as 5 to do Dragon. Now, normally this is suboptimal. If you have a Herald push in mid lane, you want to leave a couple people there, send a couple people back to do Dragon. But they know that KT, the way they operate these pick comps, is that the TF will port in, KT will send a couple people down there, they'll instantly get a man advantage on the Dragon, and then they'll win that fight and start to turn the game around. So instead, they just very deliberately and very slowly push up. It looks like a solo queue game in a lot of ways. They push up, and then they just collectively as 5 go back over to the Dragon. But what this means is that KT never gets the isolations that they want in this composition, because Gen.G knows what they want to do, and they respect it. Gen.G respects the fuck out of KT's pick comp, and so they win this game actually quite easily. Okay, so let's go to the next game. What does KT do? They're like, oh shit, they've downloaded our pick comp. They can play this style. It's not just about the champions that they play, it's about the way that they're playing the map and not giving us openings. So then they construct fucking KT Exodia comp from earlier this season. Ezreal, Karma. So they haven't lost with that duo bot lane. Sejuani, Renekton, Talia. You're like, oh my God, this is the style of composition that T1 banned out to beat them in the second round robin. And that's where KT then went back to the lab and cooked up the pick comps. But you're like, holy shit, KT got everything. They got everything that they wanted. And yet, Gen.G is able to put together a very beefy front line against the Ezreal and the Karma and out team fight them by using mid Cassante with some early pressure from Peanuts Elise. And so at this point, you're like, oh my God, Gen.G has literally prepared so well that they beat KT's 2 best team comps. And at this point, you're like, this series is over because KT, there is nowhere else to go for KT. KT is fucked at this point. And the only thing they could do is maybe, pull out something new in the third game or the fourth game of the series. Didn't happen. Instead, Gen.G pulls out the top lane Gragas for Doran, again dominates this game. They try the Twisted Fate this time around, doesn't end up working. And you know, you can really see that Gen.G's preparation paid off, and that they knew exactly their win conditions against some of KT's compositions. And when I saw this, I was like, I don't know if they can prepare well for T1 in 24 hours, but holy shit, that was an impressive preparation. When we get into the finals, it really just doesn't feel like T1 has prepared for Gen.G at all. You don't see that same reaction. They had a week to prepare for both KT and Gen.G. And instead, Gen.G is the team that's, you know, having these amazing performances on the top Gragas. Doran is popping off on some of these teleport flanks, isolating members of T1. They have, as we discussed earlier, the level 1 plan for the Caitlyn and Lux. Even if it wasn't wholly successful, the prep was still there. And then they lose a game in game number 3 because T1 is playing a traditional front-to-back team fighting composition. So what does Gen.G do? Instantly turns on a dime. They say, okay, if you want to play Peel and you want to play Sion Tom Kench, first off, we're going to T1 bans the Tom Kench. So they actually don't allow that option for themselves. And then they save their top lane counter pick Sion into double AD carries who could build Kraken Slayer and basically lose the game themselves. Like, they themselves have a terrible draft T1, and Gen.G saying, okay, we will fight you front to back, but we're going to do it with a fucking Maokai because our jungler plays Maokai, which is still one of the best junglers in the game if you can get it through the early game. Like, the late game is insane. And we'll play Lulu Jinx, and you have to dive us, or you opt into a front to back team fight. But your problem is that you don't have 2 AD carries to bust the tanks. So it was a really, I think, hard game from T1, but their last team composition really had no identity. Like, you can't have Ahri and Lee Sin trying to go into the fight while Sion and Braum are trying to peel for a very low mobility Aphelios. You will just lose. You will just lose, especially against the CC. Like, you can't let them have the Lulu. You can't let them have the Maokai in that case. And these are known. Like, it's known that Peanut's jungle pool is basically Vi, Sejuani, Maokai, and Wukong. So you know what you're getting. Like, it's not a surprise.
Yeah, the key to me is, like you say, it's actually, if anything, if you specifically go from the Gen.G angle of how they won this LCK split, because they weren't the favourite at any point in time. In fact, there was even a point in time when we were coming to playoffs, Monte, where the angle I was waiting for is, dude, I'm just waiting for KT to beat Gen.G and make a telecom war final. Like, it looked like it could even have happened. So the key for me is, this is why I also give a lot of the props to Score, is when I watch the LPL matches, I'll just be straight up with you. I just think it's individual performance decides those games. You have so many big name players. If a superstar player pops off, he wins the game. So sometimes in the LPL, you can look at it and go, whatever, we both drafted okay, and you just won. I agree. If you actually look, Gen.G's like evolution over the split, and especially at the end, how they essentially downloaded the opponent and countered them is so impressive. Because think about this, guys. The 2 teams that were the hardest for Gen.G, the whole split, were KT Rolster because of this style of play, and then they just never were going to beat T1. Those are the 2 teams that were supposed to be like, right, we can't beat them. And instead, what you found is, after having a whole split, they got handled KT. That one was sorted. Then they came to T1 and they got to play them and got rocked in that first BO1, like the BO5 rather. They got easily handled in that upper bracket final. But when they came back in the final, the difference is T1 did think it was just business as usual. Run it back. If anything, let's play safe with our picks with a better team. But yeah, Gen.G actually each time came with a game plan. Like, the coaching staff just killed it this split, mate. What a great job. And obviously, the players look very coachable.
Yeah, and it's not like Chovy was, you know, a known Tristana player. He had played one other game of Tristana this spring, but it was the perfect pick in that scenario. And even though they fell behind early, yes, the jungle mid 2v2 with Ahri and Lee Sin is very strong. Yes, they had some nice plays onto mid lane to kill Chovy, but it doesn't matter when you don't have late game threat onto Tristana and Jinx. And they can just basically optimally fight every single team fight and free auto. So, I mean, I think Gen.G really deserved this title. They absolutely played better in the later stages of the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, I think they had a bad read the first time they played against T1, and T1 justifiably won that series, but it didn't feel like T1 took KT seriously. Like, again, we have the questions. Why did T1 pick KT? That was stupid. Okay, like I know that they lost to Hanwha, but like Hanwha looked way worse, just way worse.
That was an overreaction from the D+ series, wasn't it? Come on, it had to be, had to be.
Yeah, and I mean KT did look bad against D+, but like KT over the end of this split was much more threatening as a team. And you know, you come into the finals, and it just looks like they have not prepared for Gen.G at all. They make scared picks. For all of the praise that Faker was getting, kind of roaming the map, Chovy comprehensively outroamed him this series. Chovy, this is what, to your point earlier, Thorin, about Chovy being a choker or Chovy only side laning. Like, Chovy was everywhere in these last two series. He was dumpstering the entire map. He was playing really, really, really fucking well. And yeah, Paze's score lines look good, but Paze was fed a lot of these kills. And I'm not saying Paze played badly. Paze played well, but just objectively, Chovy and Doran and Delight and Peanut Paze was probably the worst player on this team in the last two best of fives. He played great, but he was probably the worst player on this team. But you know what he did? He did his fucking job. He received the kills. He put out the damage. He carried some of these games, but a lot of the hard work was being done by Doran, Peanut, and Delight really stepping up in the last two best of fives. Delight was amazing. I mean, Delight was so good, guys. I was very, very impressed by him. The creativity of some of his playmaking. Like, think about the moment in the KT series where Delight was playing Tom Kench in game number 2. And basically, you can see how smart this team is in terms of planning and traps, because there's a moment when Lehens is standing on a ward in the mid lane and they're trying to catch him out, but they're far away and they don't want him to just jump over the wall. So what they do is that Delight pretends to sweep a ward. So he turns on his lens, walks up to the ward, which disables the vision, auto attacks it once so that Lehens thinks that he's just sitting there going to keep on clearing the ward. Then he uses Abyssal Dive to dive on the other side of the wall, which still knocks up Lehens. Chovy's on the other side, charms him, and they 100-0 him. That is a fucking baller play that happened. And this is the level that Gen.G was playing on. They were thinking ahead. They were setting vision traps. They were coordinating to create these incredibly creative pincer attacks on the enemy. And yeah, really just on a next level.
By the way, I'll throw in there as well. Based on things I've heard in the past, particularly from LS, the other reason why that type of play is very impressive, Monty, is historically Chovy famously is supposed to be quite a quiet player. That he's the sort of guy who just expects you to know what to do to play with him. So I don't imagine that's like Chovy making that call, Monty. That's like, I imagine Delight just found the pick and was basically like, come on in now, and they just coordinated the play. It was a fucking sick alley-oop, though. I agree. It was pretty good.
Yeah,
it was almost T1-esque.
Yeah, it was almost T1-esque. You know, in the end, it felt like Gen.G was better at creating picks with the Lysandra and the Ahri, and better at doing the side lanes. And I think the mystery, too, that we're just left with when it comes to T1 is, you know, where was the Elise in game 4 of this series? Like, Elise was banned in a lot of these games, but there was an opportunity here to do what T1 does, play a bully lane in the 4th game of the series, you know, try and get those roams, try and dive bot with the Elise, do what you have been best at for the entirety of this split. And instead they give it up. You know, they were forced to ban the Gragas for the 3rd game of this series, but the whole power of T1 is that maybe you have a flex Gragas. You know, the first time T1 was on the red side was the 4th game of this series. They didn't ban the Gragas. Where's the Gragas here? Why don't you flex the Gragas pick? That way you have a stronger draft position going into R5. You know, I just don't get it. I just don't get the game plan, and it felt very disrespectful the way they played against KT with almost no prep and like should have lost that series if we're being honest.
Oh, they should.
And then they come into these finals and it feels like, again, they just, when you start to fluster them, they basically just turtle up inside of their shell and they play the most passive style imaginable. And I wish this is the only time we have seen this, but we've seen it other times. Now it's a pattern now. And you can't be a team that makes 5 consecutive finals with this roster. They've made all the finals, but lose 4 of them and be a favorite in 4 of them and win one of the 4 you're a favorite. That's just unacceptable. Like their 20% finals win rate for a team that we know can be extraordinarily strong is pathetic.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.